Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies, with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife. Their house was small. For the lumber to build it had to be carried by wagon many miles. There were 4 walls, a floor and a roof, which made one room, and this room contained a rusty-looking cook stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had a big bed in one corner, and Dorothy a little bed in another corner. There was no garret at all, and no cellar, except a small hole dug in the ground, called a cyclone cellar, where the family could go in case one of those great whirlwinds arose, mighty enough to crush any building in its path. It was reached by a trapdoor in the middle of the floor, from which a ladder led down into the small, dark hole. When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray prairie on every side. Not a tree nor a house broke the broad sweep of flat country that reached to the edge of the sky in all directions. The sun had baked the plowed land into a gray mass, with little cracks running through it. Even the grass was not green, for the sun had burned the tops of the long blades until they were the same gray color to be seen everywhere. Once the house had been painted, but the sun blistered the paint and the rains washed it away, and now the house was as dull and gray as everything else. When Aunt Em came there to live, she was a young, pretty wife. The sun and wind had changed her too. They had taken the sparkle from her eyes and left them a sober gray. They had taken the red from her cheeks and lips, and they were gray also. She was thin and gaunt, and never smiled now. When Dorothy, who was an orphan, first came to her, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child's laughter that she would scream and press her hand upon her heart whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears, and she still looked at the little girl with wonder that she could find anything to laugh at. Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning till night, and did not know what joy was. He was gray also, from his long beard to his rough boots, and he looked stern and solemn, and rarely spoke. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh, and saved her from growing as gray as her other surroundings. Toto was not gray. He was a little black dog, with long silky hair and small black eyes that twinkled merrily on either side of his funny, wee nose. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him, and loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky, which was even grayer than usual. Dorothy stood in the door with Toto in her arms, and looked at the sky, too. Aunt Em was washing the dishes. From the far north they heard a low wail of the wind, and Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in waves before the coming storm. There now came a sharp whistling in the air from the south, and as they turned their eyes that way they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly Uncle Henry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he called to his wife. "I'll go look after the stock." Then he ran toward the sheds where the cows and horses were kept. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door. One glance told her of the danger close at hand. "Quick, Dorothy," she screamed. "Run for the cellar." Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed, and the girl started to get him. Aunt Em, badly frightened, threw open the trapdoor in the floor and climbed down the ladder into the small, dark hole. Dorothy caught Toto at last and started to follow her aunt. When she was halfway across the room, there came a great shriek from the wind. and the house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down suddenly upon the floor. Then a strange thing happened. The house whirled around 2 or 3 times and rose slowly through the air. Dorothy felt as if she were going up in a balloon. The north and south winds met where the house stood and made it the exact center of the cyclone. In the middle of a cyclone, the air is generally still, but the great pressure of the wind on every side of the house raised it up higher and higher, until it was at the very top of the cyclone, and there it remained, and was carried miles and miles away as easily as you could carry a feather. It was very dark, and the wind howled horribly around her, but Dorothy found she was riding quite easily. After the first few whirls around, and one other time when the house tipped badly, she felt as if she were being rocked gently, like a baby in a cradle. Toto did not like it. He ran about the room, now here, now there, barking loudly. But Dorothy sat quite still on the floor and waited to see what would happen. Once Toto got too near the open trapdoor and fell in, and at first the little girl thought she had lost him. But soon she saw one of his ears sticking up through the hole, for the strong pressure of the air was keeping him up, so that he could not fall. She crept to the hole, caught Toto by the ear, and dragged him into the room again, afterward closing the trapdoor, so that no more accidents could happen. Hour after hour passed away, and slowly Dorothy got over her fright, but she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked so loudly all about her that she nearly became deaf. At first she had wondered if she would be dashed to pieces when the house fell again, but as the hours passed and nothing terrible happened, she stopped worrying and resolved to wait calmly and see what the future would bring. At last she crawled over the swaying floor to her bed and lay down upon it, and Toto followed and lay down beside her. In spite of the swaying of the house and the wailing of the wind, Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell fast asleep. When Dorothy stepped upon the threshold of the little house, she saw before her a strange and wonderful sight. There stood the Witch of the East, with her long, skinny arms folded across her breast, and a wicked smile upon her face. But Dorothy did not know this, for the witch lay under the house, which had fallen upon her. All that Dorothy saw was a smiling throng of little folk, dressed in blue, and wearing conical hats and blue shoes. They were so happy that they seemed almost to dance with joy, and they sang a welcoming song in tiny voices. "Welcome, welcome to our land," they cried. "Ever since the wicked Witch of the East met her doom, the chosen one has come at last. Welcome, O Princess. Welcome to Munchkinland." Dorothy gazed at them in amazement. "Oh, I don't know you," she answered, "but I am Dorothy from Kansas." "Dorothy, Princess of Oz," they replied in chorus. "You have landed by accident, but by magic now belong to our realm. Without the power of that wicked which we are free. Come, come, and hear the king's decree." They led Dorothy down a path of ribbons and rippling blue flowers to a prettily constructed pavilion, where a solemn procession awaited her. At the front stood 3 Munchkin counselors, each wearing a star upon his breast. Behind them, a multitude of little folks, all smiling, all talking, all slightly curtsying or bowing as Dorothy passed by. At one end of the pavilion stood a tiny throne, and upon it sat a very old and very benevolent-looking man, dressed in royal Munchkin robes of deepest blue. This was the king of the Munchkins. He rose as Dorothy approached, and with a kindly voice spoke. "Princess Dorothy, welcome. We rejoice at your safe arrival and grieve that your house fell by accident upon the wicked Witch of the East. By that event our terrible sorceress was slain, and henceforth Munchkinland is free. In token of our gratitude, accept these shoes, made of pure silver, which once were the witch of the East's. They fit you exactly, princess, and contain magic powers, which will guard you on your journey. Keep them close, and perhaps they may lead you home again. Then the king rose and placed 2 small silver slippers upon Dorothy's feet. They belong to you now, he said, but be warned, never remove them, or their power will vanish. Dorothy felt a sudden thrill. Thank you, your majesty, she said, but I should like to know where I am, and how I may get back home to Kansas. You are in Munchkinland, answered the king. To the east lies the domain of the wicked, which of the east now no more. To the south the land of Quadlings, to the west the Winkies, and to the north the Gillikins. Far beyond these realms lies the Emerald City, where the great wizard Oz rules. If you go there, princess, and ask him, he may be able to send you back to Kansas. Then I will go at once, declared Dorothy. We will escort you part of the way, said the king, but beyond the edge of Munchkinland you must travel alone, or with such companions as you may meet. Remember, follow the yellow brick road, and it will guide you straight to the Emerald City. There was a mighty cheer from the Munchkins, and they began to play on tiny pipes and drums, dancing about Dorothy's feet. The king then bade them be seated and delivered a short address concerning the overthrow of the witch and the glad new era for Munchkinland. When the ceremony was over, the little folk brought Dorothy food and drink, and among the crowd she noticed a curious figure of straw, bound together with cords, standing foolishly beside the pavilion. Near him was a tall man of tin, and beyond these 2 a large beast, an enormous lion, who looked about him wistfully, as though seeking courage. Dorothy wondered who these strangers might be, but before she could ask, the procession reformed, and the king's courtiers began to escort her back to the little house, where her journey would begin in earnest. She stepped forward, her heart light with hope that the great Wizard of Oz would soon send her home, and with a secret gratitude to her new friends in blue, who had honored her so royally. Dorothy thanked the Munchkins for their kindness, and set out at once down the yellow brick road. The path under her feet was beaten hard and firm, although the grass grew tall upon either side. Everywhere she looked the tall trees overarched the road, making a pleasant tunnel of green, a perfect shelter from the broiling summer sun. Yet Dorothy hurried fast, fearing lest the wicked witch of the west should send her black crows to spy upon her. After walking for some time, she came to a clearing, where stood a most curious figure, a man-shaped scarecrow, all made of straw, with a painted face, and dressed in old clothes. He was so stiff and awkward that Dorothy could hardly believe he was alive. Yet as she approached she saw that he was indeed moving his arms and legs. "Good Scarecrow," called Dorothy, "why do you stand here all alone? Surely you must be tired of drifting in the wind, and I can give you a better place to stay." "I am tired," replied the Scarecrow, "but I cannot move very fast, for I have no feet to speak of. I only stand here on a wooden post." Dorothy looked more closely and discovered that at his feet was a pointed wooden framework driven into the ground, so that when the wind blew it only made him sway. She felt sorry for him. "Why don't you come with me?" she said. "I am going to the Emerald City to ask the great wizard Oz to send me back to Kansas. Perhaps he can give you a brain, and then you would not be made of straw." The Scarecrow's painted face brightened. "Oh, please take me with you," he cried. "I would give anything to have a brain. I want to think, but my straw head is so empty that when the wind blows through me, I know nothing at all." So Dorothy untied the cords that bound him, and the Scarecrow hopped down from the post. He shook himself vigorously, and the straw rattled in his arms and legs as he sprang to life. "We will be friends," said Dorothy, "and journey together." Just then the wind began to rise, and thick clouds gathered overhead. The Scarecrow stood bravely beside Dorothy, though he shook and rattled with every gust. Suddenly 3 black crows swooped from the trees and circled above them, cawing loudly. "Fly away, you wicked birds!" shouted the Scarecrow, and clutching his straw hat, he ran forward, but his legs were so clumsy that he soon fell headlong, scattering straw in all directions. Dorothy knelt quickly and helped him to his feet. "Don't mind them," she said. "We will walk faster. Perhaps we can outrun them." The crows alighted on the nearest trees and began pecking at the Scarecrow. One tore at his sleeve, another pulled at his coat, and the third pecked at his hat. "Save me, Dorothy!" cried the Scarecrow, already losing bits of straw. Dorothy sprang forward, seized a stick from the roadside, and brandished it at the crows. They fluttered up into the air, cawing angrily, but Dorothy waved the stick so fiercely that they flew away and did not return. "Thank you, Dorothy," said the Scarecrow, as he brushed the straw from his coat. "You have saved my life, if I can be said to have one." They walked on together until at last they came in sight of the Emerald City, its green walls and towering spires shining in the sunlight. "We have reached our goal," said Dorothy, "and the great wizard Oz may now grant your wish for a brain." So hand in hand the girl and the living Scarecrow proceeded down the yellow brick road, talking of the marvels they hoped to discover. "The cowardly lion will not eat you. He is the bravest, nay, the bravest and most terrible beast in all the land. But fear has made him gentle, and here is how Dorothy met him." Just as the Tin Woodman spoke, there came from the forest a terrible roar, and the next moment a great lion bounded into the road. With one blow of his paw, he sent the Scarecrow spinning over and over to the edge of the road, and then he struck at the Tin Woodman with his sharp claws. But to the lion's surprise, he could make no impression on the tin, although the woodman fell over in the road and lay still. Little Toto, now that he had an enemy to face, ran barking toward the lion, and the great beast had opened his mouth to bite the dog, when Dorothy, fearing Toto would be killed, and heedless of danger, rushed forward and slapped the lion upon his nose as hard as she could, crying out, "Don't you dare to bite Toto! You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a big beast like you, to bite a poor little dog." "I didn't bite him," said the lion, as he rubbed his nose with his paw where Dorothy had hit it. "No, but you tried to," she retorted. "You are nothing but a big coward." "I know it," said the lion, hanging his head in shame. "I've always known it, but how can I help it?" "I don't know, I'm sure. To think of your striking a stuffed man, like the poor Scarecrow." "Is he stuffed?" asked the lion in surprise, as he watched Dorothy pick up the Scarecrow and set him upon his feet, while she patted him into shape again. "Of course he's stuffed," replied Dorothy, who was still angry. "That's why he went over so easily," remarked the lion. "It astonished me to see him whirl around so. Is the other one stuffed also?" "No," said Dorothy. "He's made of tin." and she helped the woodman up again. "That's why I could make no impression," said the lion. "When I struck the tin, it gave such a cold shock that I dropped him at once." "What is that little animal you are so tender of?" he asked, looking at Toto. "He's my dog, Toto," answered Dorothy. "Is he made of tin or stuffed?" asked the lion. "Neither. He's a meat dog," said the girl. "Oh," said the lion sadly. "He's a curious animal, and seems remarkably small now that I look at him. No one would think of biting such a little thing except a coward like me." "What makes you a coward?" asked Dorothy, looking at the great beast in wonder, for he was as big as a small horse. "It's a mystery," replied the lion. "All the other animals in the forest expect me to be brave, for the lion is thought to be king of beasts. I learned that if I roared very loudly, every living thing fled from me. Yet whenever I face real danger, my heart begins to beat fast, and I tremble." "Perhaps you have heart disease," said the Tin Woodman. "It may be," said the lion. "If you have," continued the Tin Woodman, "you ought to be glad, for it proves you have a heart. For my part, I have no heart, so I cannot have heart disease." "Perhaps," said the lion thoughtfully, "if I had no heart I should not be a coward." "Have you brains?" asked the Scarecrow. "I suppose so. I've never looked to see," replied the lion. "I am going to the Great Oz to ask him to give me some," said the Scarecrow, "for my head is stuffed with straw." "And I am going to ask him to give me a heart," said the Tin Woodman. "And I am going to ask him to send Toto and me back to Kansas," said Dorothy. "Do you think Oz could give me courage?" asked the Cowardly Lion. "Just as easily as he could give you a brain," said the Scarecrow. "Or give me a heart," added the Woodman. "Or send me back to Kansas," said Dorothy. "Then, if you don't mind, I'll go with you," said the lion, "for my life is unbearable without courage." "You will be very welcome," answered Dorothy, "for you will help keep away other wild beasts." And so the lion joined Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Woodman on their journey toward the Emerald City. They camped that night beneath a large tree in the forest, its thick branches shielding them from the dew. The Tin Woodman chopped a great pile of wood, and Dorothy built a fire that burned brightly until morning. After sharing the last of her bread and stretching by the fire, they set out at dawn once more on the yellow brick road. Before long, they came upon a great ditch that crossed their path and stretched away through the forest, its banks so steep none could climb down. At the edge they peered into the darkness below and saw jagged rocks far beneath. "What shall we do?" asked Dorothy, despairingly. "I haven't the faintest idea," said the Tin Woodman. The Scarecrow then proposed, "If the Cowardly Lion can leap, he may carry each of us in turn on his back." "I think I could jump it," said the lion after careful measurement. "Then we are saved," said the Scarecrow, "for you can carry us over one at a time." So the lion crouched, sprang high into the air, and landed safely on the far side. He returned for Dorothy, who rode clinging to his mane, and then brought the Tin Woodman across, panting from the effort. Their relief was short-lived, for on the other side the forest grew dark and ominous, and strange growls echoed from unseen beasts. The lion whispered that these were the Kalidas, monsters with bodies like bears and heads like tigers, with claws sharp enough to tear them apart. Soon they encountered a second, wider gulf. The Scarecrow had an idea. Chopped down a neighboring tree so it would bridge the gap. The Tin Woodman's axe bit swiftly through the trunk, and with a mighty shove from the lion the tree fell, spanning the gulf. As they began to cross, two Kalidas charged across behind them. Dorothy and her friends hurried, but the lion, though terrified, turned to face the beasts. He let out a roar so thunderous that the Kalidas hesitated, long enough for the Scarecrow to shout, "Now!" The woodmen chopped the tree's end at their side, and it crashed into the chasm, carrying the Kalidas with it to their doom below. Panting and shaken, they gathered themselves on the far bank. The lion, his courage tested, drew in a deep breath and admitted, "I feel braver than ever." Renewed in spirit, the four companions resumed their journey through the forest, their hopes high as the spires of the Emerald City drew ever closer. Even with eyes protected by the green spectacles, Dorothy and her friends were at first dazzled by the brilliancy of the wonderful city. The streets were lined with beautiful houses all built of green marble and studded everywhere with sparkling emeralds. They walked over a pavement of the same green marble, and where the blocks were joined together were rows of emeralds, set closely and glittering in the brightness of the sun. The window panes were of green glass. Even the sky above the city had a green tint, and the rays of the sun were green. There were many people, men, women, and children, walking about, and these were all dressed in green clothes and had greenish skins. They looked at Dorothy and her strangely assorted company with wondering eyes, and the children all ran away and hid behind their mothers when they saw the lion, but no one spoke to them. Many shops stood in the street, and Dorothy saw that everything in them was green. Green candy and green popcorn were offered for sale, as well as green shoes, green hats, and green clothes of all sorts. At one place a man was selling green lemonade, and when the children bought it, Dorothy could see that they paid for it with green pennies. There seemed to be no horses nor animals of any kind. The men carried things around in little green carts, which they pushed before them. Everyone seemed happy and contented and prosperous. The guardian of the gates led them through the streets until they came to a big building, exactly in the middle of the city, which was the Palace of Oz, the great wizard. There was a soldier before the door, dressed in a green uniform and wearing a long green beard. "Here are strangers," said the guardian of the gates to him, "and they demand to see the great Oz." "Step inside," answered the soldier, "and I will carry your message to him." So they passed through the palace gates and were led into a big room with a green carpet and lovely green furniture set with emeralds. The soldier made them all wipe their feet upon a green mat before entering this room, and when they were seated he said politely, "Please make yourselves comfortable while I go to the door of the throne room and tell Oz you are here." They had to wait a long time before the soldier returned. When at last he came back, Dorothy asked, "Have you seen Oz?" "Oh, no," returned the soldier. "I have never seen him, but I spoke to him as he sat behind his screen and gave him your message. He said he will grant you an audience, if you so desire, but each one of you must enter his presence alone, and he will admit but one each day. Therefore, as you must remain in the palace for several days, I will have you shown to rooms where you may rest in comfort after your journey." "Thank you," replied the girl. "That is very kind of Oz." The soldier now blew upon a green whistle, and at once a young girl, dressed in a pretty green silk gown, entered the room. She had lovely green hair and green eyes, and she bowed low before Dorothy as she said, "Follow me, and I will show you your room." So Dorothy said goodbye to all her friends except Toto, and taking the dog in her arms, followed the green girl through 7 passages and up 3 flights of stairs until they came to a room at the front of the palace. It was the sweetest little room in the world, with a soft, comfortable bed that had sheets of green silk and a green velvet counterpane. There was a tiny fountain in the middle of the room that shot a spray of green perfume into the air, to fall back into a beautifully carved green marble basin. Beautiful green flowers stood in the windows, and there was a shelf with a row of little green books. When Dorothy had time to open these books, she found them full of queer green pictures that made her laugh. They were so funny. In a wardrobe were many green dresses, made of silk and satin and velvet, and all of them fitted Dorothy exactly. "Make yourself perfectly at home," said the green girl, "and if you wish for anything, ring the bell. Oz will send for you tomorrow morning." The soldier with the green whiskers led them through the streets of the Emerald City until they reached the room where the guardian of the gates lived. This officer unlocked their spectacles to put them back in his great box, and then he politely opened the gate for our friends. "Which road leads to the Wicked Witch of the West?" asked Dorothy. "There's no road," answered the guardian of the gates. "No one ever wishes to go that way." "How, then, are we to find her?" inquired the girl. "That will be easy," replied the man. "For when she knows you are in the country of the Winkies, she will find you and make you all her slaves." "Perhaps not," said the Scarecrow, "for we mean to destroy her." "Oh, that is different," said the guardian of the gates. "No one has ever destroyed her before, so I naturally thought she would make slaves of you, as she has of the rest. But take care, for she is wicked and fierce, and may not allow you to destroy her. Keep to the west, where the sun sets, and you cannot fail to find her." They thanked him and bade him goodbye, and turned toward the west, walking over fields of soft grass dotted here and there with daisies and buttercups. Dorothy still wore the pretty silk dress she had put on in the palace, but now, to her surprise, she found it was no longer green, but pure white. The ribbon around Toto's neck had also lost its green color, and was as white as Dorothy's dress. The Emerald City was soon left far behind. As they advanced, the ground became rougher and hillier, for there were no farms nor houses in this country of the West, and the ground was untilled. In the afternoon the sun shone hot in their faces, for there were no trees to offer them shade, so that before night Dorothy and Toto and the lion were tired, and lay down upon the grass and fell asleep, with the woodman and the Scarecrow keeping watch. Now the Wicked Witch of the West had but one eye, yet that was as powerful as a telescope, and could see everywhere. So, as she sat in the door of her castle, she happened to look around and saw Dorothy lying asleep, with her friends all about her. They were a long distance off, but the Wicked Witch was angry to find them in her country. So she blew upon a silver whistle that hung around her neck. At once there came running to her from all directions a pack of great wolves. They had long legs and fierce eyes and sharp teeth. "Go to those people," said the witch, "and tear them to pieces." "Are you not going to make them your slaves?" asked the leader of the wolves. "No," she answered. "One is of tin and one of straw. One is a girl and another a lion. None of them is fit to work, so you may tear them into small pieces." "Very well," said the wolf, and he dashed away at full speed, followed by the others. It was lucky the Scarecrow and the woodman were wide awake and heard the wolves coming. "This is my fight," said the woodman. "So get behind me, and I will meet them as they come." He seized his axe, which he had made very sharp, and as the leader of the wolves came on, the Tin Woodman swung his arm and chopped the wolf's head from its body, so that it immediately died. As soon as he could raise his axe, another wolf came up, and he also fell under the sharp edge of the Tin Woodman's weapon. There were 40 wolves, and 40 times a wolf was killed, so that at last they all lay dead in a heap before the woodman. Then he put down his axe and sat beside the Scarecrow, who said, "It was a good fight, friend." They waited until Dorothy awoke the next morning. The little girl was quite frightened when she saw the great pile of shaggy wolves, but the Tin Woodman told her all. She thanked him for saving them and sat down to breakfast, after which they started again upon their journey. The Cowardly Lion was much pleased to hear that the wicked which had been melted by a bucket of water, and Dorothy at once unlocked the gate of his prison and set him free. They went in together to the castle, where Dorothy's first act was to call all the Winkies together and tell them they were no longer slaves. There was great rejoicing among the yellow Winkies, for they had been made to work hard during many years for the wicked witch, who had always treated them with great cruelty. They kept this day as a holiday, then and ever after, and spent the time in feasting and dancing. If our friends, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, were only with us, said the Lion, I should be quite happy. Don't you suppose we could rescue them? Asked the girl anxiously. We can try, answered the Lion. So they called the yellow Winkies and asked if they would help to rescue their friends, and the Winkies said that they would be delighted to do all in their power for Dorothy, who had set them free from bondage. They chose a number of the Winkies who looked as if they knew the most, and all set off. They traveled that day and part of the next until they came to the rocky plain where the Tin Woodman lay, all battered and dented. His axe was near him, but the blade was rusted and the handle broken off short. The Winkies lifted him tenderly in their arms and carried him back to the yellow castle again, Dorothy shedding a few tears by the way at the sad plight of her old friend, and the Lion looking sober and sorry. When they reached the castle, Dorothy said to the Winkies, Are any of your people tinsmiths? Oh yes, some of us are very good tinsmiths, they told her. Then bring them to me, she said. And when the tinsmiths came, bringing with them all their tools and baskets, she inquired, Can you straighten out those dents in the Tin Woodman, and bend him back into shape again, and solder him together where he is broken? The tinsmiths looked the woodman over carefully, and then answered that they thought they could mend him, so he would be as good as ever. So they set to work in one of the big yellow rooms of the castle, and worked for 3 days and 4 nights, hammering and twisting and bending and soldering and polishing and pounding at the legs and body and head of the Tin Woodman, until at last he was straightened out into his old form, and his joints worked as well as ever. When at last he walked into Dorothy's room and thanked her for rescuing him, he was so pleased that he wept tears of joy, and Dorothy had to wipe every tear carefully from his face with her apron, so his joints would not be rusted. As for the Lion, he wiped his eyes so often with the tip of his tail that it became quite wet, and he was obliged to go out into the courtyard and hold it in the sun till it dried. If we only had the Scarecrow with us again, said the Tin Woodman, when Dorothy had finished telling him everything that had happened, I should be quite happy. We must try to find him, said the girl. So she called the Winkies to help her. and they walked all that day and part of the next until they came to the tall tree in the branches of which the winged monkeys had tossed the scarecrow's clothes. It was a very tall tree, and the trunk was so smooth that no one could climb it. But the woodman said at once, "I'll chop it down, and then we can get the scarecrow's clothes." Now while the tinsmiths had been at work mending the woodman himself, another of the Winkies, who was a goldsmith, had made an axe handle of solid gold and fitted it to the woodman's axe, instead of the old broken handle. Others polished the blade until all the rust was removed, and it glistened like burnished silver. As soon as he had spoken, the Tin Woodman began to chop, and in a short time the tree fell over with a crash, whereupon the scarecrow's clothes fell out of the branches and rolled off on the ground. Dorothy picked them up and had the Winkies carry them back to the castle, where they were stuffed with nice, clean straw, and behold, here was the scarecrow, as good as ever, thanking them over and over again for saving him. Now that they were reunited, Dorothy and her friends spent a few happy days at the Yellow Castle, where they found everything they needed to make them comfortable. But one day the girl thought of Aunt Em and said, "We must go back to Oz and claim his promise." "Yes," said the woodman, "at last I shall get my heart." "And I shall get my brains," added the scarecrow joyfully. "And I shall get my courage," said the lion thoughtfully. "And I shall get back to Kansas," cried Dorothy, clapping her hands. "Oh, let us start for the Emerald City tomorrow." When Dorothy and her companions had heard the roar of the lion, and had realized that the Wicked Witch of the West was dead, they said, "Now let us go back to the Emerald City and claim our rewards." So they followed the yellow brick road southward, and in 3 days they came to the edge of the dainty China country. Here the road ended at a bridge of polished glass, which spanned a river of shining blue. "We cannot cross," said Dorothy, "for the glass is so slippery that our feet will not hold us." "True," said the scarecrow, "but perhaps the Tin Woodman can carry us across one at a time." The woodman nodded, and first he lifted the scarecrow, who clung to his neck, and set him upon the far side. Next he gathered Toto in his arms, and carefully stepped over. Then Dorothy climbed upon his shoulder, and at last he bore the cowardly lion across the glass bridge, which cracked and shivered under the great beast's paws, but held firm. They pressed on until they came to a grove of tall bamboo, under which they found a tiny gate, so low that Dorothy had to stoop as she entered. Beyond it stretched a lovely garden, where the air sparkled as though filled with diamonds. In the center stood a little china house, only a few feet high, but exquisitely modeled and painted in dainty colors. Every window was of fair porcelain, and through one of them Dorothy looked in and saw the loveliest furniture she had ever beheld. Tiny chairs and tables, beds of white china, and mirrors and frames of gold. As they gazed, the door of the little house opened, and out stepped a dainty china princess, clad in a gown of pale blue. Her hair was of the same fine white porcelain as the house, and her eyes sparkled like the diamonds that danced in the air. "Welcome, friends of Oz," she said in a voice as soft as wind chimes. "You stand in the dainty China country, which no one may enter save by my permission. You are welcome here, for you have freed the Winkies from their taskmasters, and no one is more dear to me than my friends." She led them inside her tiny palace and served them tea in cups of the purest white china, while the scarecrow and the woodman marveled at the perfect craftsmanship. Then the princess said, "I will guide you to the Emerald City by a path that shall avoid all danger." And she unrolled a silken map, pointing out a hidden road through the silver forest that would bring them safely to the city gates. So, refreshed and aided by their new friend, Dorothy and her companions set out once more on their journey. The path wound through the silver forest, where the leaves of the trees shimmered like polished metal. Presently, they came to a field of tall, white mushrooms, and Dorothy, remembering the poppies, warned her friends not to touch them. Not far beyond, they heard the thudding sound of great hammers, and peered ahead to see 40 strange creatures, each with a head like a mallet and a neck like a flexible spring. "Beware the hammerheads," hissed the China Princess. "They will strike you senseless if you linger." The lion pressed forward, but at his first step a hammerhead swung its neck and brought its wooden head down with a crash upon the lion's shoulder. The lion roared in pain, but Dorothy shrank back. The scarecrow ran to help, but another hammerhead struck him across the back, and bits of straw flew in every direction. "Hold still," cried the Tin Woodman, lifting his axe. "I will clear a path for us." He swung the axe in a wide circle, and in 2 blows felled the monster nearest him. Then, with Dorothy and the scarecrow behind him, he advanced, chopping down one after another until all 40 lay motionless on the ground. Their wooden heads rolled among the silver leaves, and at last there was silence. Chapter 20. The Dainty China Country. After the battle, the hammerheads were carried to the China Princess, who restored them to life by touching each with a tiny wand of pearl. They bowed their hollow heads and offered to serve Dorothy and her friends. "No," said the princess, "we only wish to repay your kindness." She bade them keep to her hidden path, which wound upward through the silver forest and at last descended toward the towers of emerald that glowed in the distance. At twilight, they reached the gates of the Emerald City once more. Past the soldier with the green whiskers they went, and up the great marble steps into the throne room of the wizard, who sat behind his curtain booming. "Who dares enter the presence of Oz?" "It is I, Dorothy of Kansas, come to claim my reward," she answered. One by one, the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the Cowardly Lion spoke of their wishes, brains, heart, and courage, and the curtain parted to reveal the same meek man in a hot air balloon who had promised so much. Yet, undeterred, they spoke again of their rewards, and Oz, with a sigh, granted them tokens acknowledging that they had possessed these virtues all along. The great gates of the Emerald City stood wide, and ring-ding went Dorothy's silver shoes as she entered with her friends. The Cowardly Lion, however, hesitated and looked down in shame. "Have you forgotten your courage?" asked Dorothy softly. "I fear I have grown too fond of rattling chains," he admitted. "Then you shall take your reward first," she said, and led him to the throne room. When the lion stood before the wizard's screen, a trumpet blast sounded, and Oz declared, "For your bravery, I give you the Medal of Courage." A golden medal, shaped like a lion's head, was placed around his neck, and at that moment his heart swelled with pride. No longer trembling, he roared aloud, fiercely, joyfully, proving he had found true courage within. Next came the Scarecrow, who clutched his straw-filled hat. "I beg a brain," he said. "Consider the fields of corn you once ruled," replied the great voice. "You have ever shown wisdom." Oz ordered the palace builders to fashion him a diploma, which they did out of silk and gold. Thus honored, the Scarecrow felt thoughts flutter into his straw head, and he spoke with perfect clarity. Last was the Tin Woodman, whose jointed limbs shone in the light. "My heart is empty," he said, his voice quivering. "Then you shall have a heart," said Oz, and from a golden casket he took a heart-shaped clock, ticking softly. As it was strapped to the woodman's chest, he felt warmth and compassion for the first time. Dorothy alone remained. "But what of me?" she asked. Oz answered, "You have everything you need, child. Think of Kansas." At once, Dorothy knew the silver shoes would carry her home. Surrounding her, the friends bade her farewell, and she clicked her heels thrice, whispering, "There's no place like home." With a swirl of wind and a flash of light, Dorothy found herself back on the gray Kansas prairie, Toto at her side, and Aunt Em calling her name. That evening, the Emerald City held a grand banquet in Dorothy's honor. Long tables were set with crystal and green-glazed plates, and the fields rang with music. The Lion, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Woodman sat proudly beside Dorothy, as the citizens toasted their heroes. "Toto, too," cried Dorothy, lifting her small dog, "for without him I might never have learned the way." Every face glowed with joy, but Dorothy's heart longed for the quiet farmstead. As midnight chimed, she stood, drawing her companions close. "Farewell, dear friends. My journey ends, but my love remains." Though the silver shoes sparkled, Dorothy did not forget her promise to return. A gentle wind lifted her, and in moments she stood in her own front yard. The farm looked gray and plain, yet it was the color of home. Aunt Em knelt beside her. "My dear child, I feared I had lost you," she said. Dorothy smiled, stroking Toto's fur. "I have been to the land of Oz," she whispered, "and I know now the greatest magic lies in love and courage at home." And so ends our tale, with Dorothy safe once more, her heart, mind, and spirit forever changed by the wonders she found beyond the rainbow.